At Home with the Gas Giants by Lance Ash, writing under the name Toadskabode, Part 1, Chapter 2. According to the instructions given to him by Jerry Lancaster, Alex Spaghetti was to pick up company car number 12 at the lot. He yawned as he signed the papers giving him possession of the car, a kind of station wagon known as a rectibdiagabro. "Not the sportiest thing, is it?" he said as he handed the clipboard and pen back to the lot attendant. "Don't fool yourself," the man, a red buttons type in a locomotive engineer's cap, replied. "That's a genuine James Bond car, that is." Spaghetti pursed his lips and waved his hand, dismissing James Bond as an inferior product of diseased minds. Now, Garlic or Gibbon, but he didn't have time to get into that now. He took the keys from the little red-haired man and got behind the wheel. He hadn't had as much sleep as he'd liked. Fortunately, he lived not too far from the company lot. He made it to the curb in front of the plasma building 30 seconds ahead of schedule. "Hell, I had time for another banana," he thought as he glanced at his watch. Looking back up, he was frightened to see a man reaching for the passenger door handle. The man's hand hovered, waiting. Spaghetti sat transfixed until the man bent slightly, dropping his face just below the top of the window. He looked into Spaghetti's eyes. His hand gestured at the door. Suddenly, Spaghetti realized the door was locked. He hastened to reverse that situation. He barely had time to wonder how the man had known the door was locked before the man was seated beside him. Spaghetti started to ask, "Clark Seville?" But the man intercepted the question, flashing an identification card issued by the suggestible trapezoid. Unbeknownst to either of the men, a subsidiary of Space Limited Accomplishments. Giving the man's name as Clark Seville. There was a photo as well, one which Spaghetti had time to study. The face in the picture seemed crueler than that of the man beside him. "Clark Seville," the man, a big Mike Hammer type, announced. I say Mike Hammer, but there was something more genteel about him. Oddly, he was like a genteel Mike Hammer and a big, dangerous Fred Rogers all at the same time. His voice was mellow, the words coming out slow and deliberate like John Wayne combined with Monty Dupuis. He put his ID away in the inner pocket of a jacket that Alex Spaghetti just knew was filled with gadgets of death. "Nice to meet you," he nodded. "I'm Alex Spaghetti." Seville nodded back. He then seemed to settle into his seat with a look of expectancy. With a jolt of realization, Spaghetti put the car in gear. "Sorry," he said. "Nothing to be sorry about," Seville replied, "but I was instructed not to dawdle." Spaghetti snorted. "So was I," he grumbled. He turned the car off Knife Sharpener Road onto a road indicated by the dashboard navigation system, into which he had punched the coordinates Jerry had given him the night before. The road led out into the countryside, an area of abandoned barns and empty fields. "Don't let yourself become angered by it," Seville advised. "The people in charge can often be unbelievably stupid." He was looking out the window as he spoke, but turned back to Spaghetti with a smile. "I'll tell you a funny story in reference to that." Spaghetti listened intently. He hadn't expected this from such a serious-looking man. "There was this guy," Seville began. "Let's call him Ray, as that's a fair approximation of the kind of name this guy actually had. He worked for an agency that I am in a position to know a good deal about." He shifted in his seat as he warmed to the telling of his anecdote, twisting so that he favored one haunch over the other. Anyway, Ray had worked a solid 8-hour shift at the office and was looking forward to going home. He had only had perhaps 5 minutes of tidying up to do when he was out the door. Seville threw out his right hand like an arrow from a tightly strung bow. "His wife had something particularly tasty to eat waiting for him," he added parenthetically, as if further motivation for his main character's urgency was necessary. When his immediate supervisor put his head in the door and told him they had a meeting in the conference room. Shouldn't take 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. This was said in such a way that skipping the meeting was not an option. Ray fumed, but he said nothing. He couldn't afford to make the supervisor angry, nor could he let on that he was in any way less than a fully committed team member. Seville seemed to find this phrase humorously contemptible. He glanced out the window and exhaled forcefully through his teeth. So he went down the hall to the conference room, taking care to sit next to the door. He marked the time on his watch closely. It was now his normal time to clock out. He decided to give them 10 minutes and not 1 second more. Okay, now the speaker gets up. There are maybe 20 people in the room, all members of Ray's division. The speaker is somebody nobody's ever seen before. He's some cocksure hotshot from the agency's enforcement division, okay? Seville looked into Spaghetti's eyes, but did not wait for any assurance of understanding. This guy starts talking, and it's all about policy and procedures that Ray and everybody in the room has heard 100 times before. And Ray keeps looking at his watch. He's counting the minutes down. He hasn't called his wife to tell her he's going to be late. It's getting close to his 10-minute limit. And amazingly, the guy actually does stop talking just shy of 10 minutes. But then, this woman, another person Ray's never seen before, gets up and starts reiterating everything the first guy said. Seville really put some emotion into these words. His eyebrows raised and lowered like some kind of mechanism on a big gun on a ship. Now, it's 12 minutes since he sat down, he continued, and Ray decides, fuck it. I'm going to stand on my rights. They told me 10 minutes. I'm going home. They don't have any right to keep me here. So he stands up as unobtrusively as he can and starts for the door, all hunched over, sort of, to try not to make a big deal of his leaving. And the supervisor, the one that had told him to go to the meeting, interrupts the woman talking and asks Ray where he's going. Now, Ray had thought about lying and saying he just had to go to the toilet if he was confronted, but he decides to tell the truth. I'm going home. You said 10 minutes, and it's been more than 10 minutes, and I really have to go. Now the big shot supervisor starts laying into him in front of everybody about how this is a team, and we have an important job to do, and if we have to stay overtime on occasion to get the job done, we really shouldn't feel bad about a little sacrifice once in a while, and blah, blah, blah. So Ray, Seville wickedly smiled, Ray, who has really had it by now, opens up his briefcase, right where he's standing, and pulls out this prototype personal miniature hot air balloon. Some gizmo the lab boys had been working on. I don't know if he intended to do what he did, if he had it planned or not, but he engaged the thing right there in the conference room. It fully inflated in seconds, and Ray got in and floated away. Seville concluded his story, emphasizing each of the last words and extending his arm out like a drifting feather. From inside the building? Alex Spaghetti questioned. It seemed highly dubious to him. Well, that's what they say. Clark Seville sat back in his seat and looked down the road. This is a true story? Spaghetti asked. Seville said nothing. Was this some kind of spy agency that Ray worked for? Seville's mouth tightened into a line. You can take the story as true, he answered, or you can take it as an allegorical anecdote containing a valuable life lesson. Those are my choices, huh? Spaghetti smiled crookedly. I think we're nearing the rendezvous. Seville's manner became much more serious. He sat up straighter in his seat and peered intently at a structure on the left, just visible above a stand of neglected-looking corn. You're right. Spaghetti noted the display on the dashboard. The structure did appear to be at the given coordinates. When he got closer, he turned into a narrow parallel of ruts that cut through the rows of corn. Engage the car's high-clearance drive and you won't have to worry about bottoming out, instructed Seville. As Spaghetti showed no sign of understanding what Seville meant, the latter reached over and punched a button near the cigarette lighter. The car immediately rose on its suspension several inches, clearing the hard clumps of dirt and rock in the path. Oh, neat, Spaghetti declared. The structure that lay at the coordinates was an ancient camper set up on a high concrete base. Tractor parts and scrap metal lay in the knee-high grass around the little clearing in the cornfield where the camper stood. Spaghetti stopped the car at the edge of the clearing. Leave the engine running, Seville ordered. He withdrew a streamlined black automatic pistol from inside his coat. Stay here. He started to get out of the car. The door on the side of the camper facing them opened, and an oddly shaped man with a Brigham Young-type beard around his equally oddly shaped bald head emerged. Seville lowered his window instead of exiting and called out, Identify yourself. Jerry Lancaster, the man shouted back. He was dressed in a strange outfit that seemed all one piece. His torso, arms, and abdomen were all in black and white stripes, while the legs that stuck out from the rounded body like a baby's from its diaper were in black. His eyes were mere white discs without pupils, indicating an emptiness inside. True enough, as Jerry was an imaginary person. What's the code phrase? Seville asked. Spaghetti gaped at Seville from behind the wheel. Wasn't this overkill? Hold on. Jerry held up one finger. He put his head back inside the camper door. 4 seconds later, he turned back to the car and called out, Confusion in the igloo as the DVD is refused. Correct, muttered Seville. He raised the window and opened the door. I'll be right back, he told Spaghetti. Stepping warily through the tall grass, Seville approached the camper. He glanced about him as he moved. The gun still lay in his big fist. I'm Clark Seville, he said, looking up at Jerry, who stood on the narrow lip of concrete running about the edge of the camper's foundation. Nice to meet you, Jerry returned. Are we ready? This place is extremely vulnerable. Seville gestured about at the tall rows of corn. Just about, Jerry tried to reassure the big man. Toad's is nearly done. He turned back to the door and looked within. You're nearly done, right? Seville heard a muffled growl of speech, plaintive and irritable. He's coming. Jerry urged further reassurance. He's trying to find something. He glanced inside the camper again. Got it? He turned back to Seville, having not gotten the answer he wanted. Nice day, he noted. Seville nodded impatiently. He put his back to the concrete and kept scanning the corn. Just as a bead of sweat began rolling down the side of his face, a sign of impatience, not heat, as Seville rarely perspired in such a manner, I finally emerged from the old camper with all my gear. This included the puppet that I had been searching for with audibly mounting frustration. I am Toadskabode. I am, for the purposes of this narrative, not quite into my middle years, although I have an elderly quality that some find off-putting. This is in contrast with my childishness, something that many people think is intolerable. I know they think this, for they are all a bunch of hypocrites. I'm 6 feet and 1 inch tall, weigh about 20 pounds more than I should, and have a big nose. The mythical corollary to that last characteristic is, unfortunately, not present in my current form. However, perhaps medical science or fiction itself will one day be able to correct all such deficiencies. I habitually dress in a bulky old duffel coat and a hat made out of a leather bag with its sides rolled down to provide a brim. Inside the hat lives a kind of marine invertebrate whose tentacles make transdermal contact with my brain, providing me with additional mind powers. These mind powers form the basis for procurement, my personal belief system. The hat and its occupant form a symbiotic, semi-sentient organism. I don't know that you actually need to know all of this, as the explanation is often overrated. Suffice to say that I am a partially magical being, but you knew that when you discovered that I was both narrator and participant here. Clark Seville turned to look at me. I'm sorry, sir, he began, but I would like to confirm your identity, if you don't mind. No, I don't mind, I said. I withdrew a document from the bag I wore on a long strap around my neck. Handing it to Seville, I asked, You recognize the great seal of the suggestible trapezoid? It was odd to see the big man's eyes grow wide. Yes, I do, was his reply. Much impressed, Seville handed back the long bundle of parchment. He cleared his throat. Well, if you're ready to go. I motioned to Jerry to precede me down the narrow steps to the ground. As we waded through the grass, I asked Seville to confirm his instructions. I am to accompany you to wherever you want to go, to act as your bodyguard for as long as you need. Correct, I nodded. You understand that for the duration of this assignment, I am, in effect, an executive grade with the suggestible trapezoid. Yes, sir. Don't worry about that sir stuff. I don't like it. You call me Toadskabode like everybody else. There was no immediate reply as Seville adjusted to this new informality. Jerry and I got in the back seat of the Rectibia Gabbro. I was hoping they gave us the black one, I commented. There were 2 of these cars at the SLA lot, one black and one red. I dislike red cars. Hello there, Alex Spaghetti greeted us as Seville joined him in the front. Hello, I smiled back. You must be... I turned to Jerry. Alex Spaghetti, Jerry told me. Alex Spaghetti. That's right, and you are Toadskabode. Alex said this with evident delight. I've read some of your stories and seen your paintings. I really like your work. Well, thank you very much. I almost hate to ask you this now, but I need for you to confirm your instructions. We're saying confirm a lot, aren't we? To drive you wherever you want to go, Alec drawled. For as long as I need you, I raised my eyebrows. Did he understand my requirements? Well, for as long as I'm employed by Space Limited Accomplishments, I have a meeting of my Garlicker Gibbon fan club in a month. Oh, I won't need you that long, I insisted. But it wasn't the truth. I didn't know how long this trip would take. Okay, Alex smiled. So, where to? We're going to Wankins to visit the Perfectual. Chapter 3. King Koob, the owner of the Leonard Nimoy Memorial, had skin the color of an unripened banana, one you buy a couple of days ahead of time, knowing that it will be ready to eat by the time you are ready to eat it. He had a big nose like a bulb on an old-time automobile horn. His feet were enormous, especially for someone his size, which wasn't but about 5'6". Ordinarily dressed in clothes that matched his skin color, today he had added a long, brown, fur-trimmed coat as the city of Resum was much colder than his home of Wankins. King Koob, the receptionist repeated after he had given her his name. She ran her finger down a list of expected visitors to Trilobog Machine of Bertota. Yes, here you are. Ah, she remarked on reading a note to the side of Koob's name. It says here you are to go right in. They're expecting you. Room number 4. Koob did not say thank you. He took it as only natural that he be treated with deference. After all, was he not a king by his own hand? King of his own realm? He walked down the hall behind the receptionist's desk, found room 4, and walked in. Almost the entirety of the room was taken up by an oval table around which 11 men sat. How did they get this table in here, wondered the king. King Koob, one of the men cried as the green character in the long coat entered. Right on time, another smiled pleasantly as he noted this fact, which wasn't a fact at all, but a polite deception. Koob was actually about 12 minutes late. I expect you to be wearing a crown, the first man jokingly observed as he advanced on Koob with an extended palm. I usually do, but when traveling, it's best to maintain a low profile. King Koob looked around the room. There was a framed painting of a uniformed group of men assaulting a tall, black-walled fortress on one wall, and on the opposite, another depicting Ronald Reagan in various aspects of his public persona. Koob looked questioningly at the seats. Which was to be his? Have a seat right here next to me, King, the first man invited, touching the back of an executive model office chair. His handshake with Koob had been brief and mutually unpleasant. My name's Burstow, by the way. We spoke on the phone, he said as Koob sat in the chair indicated. Burstow then introduced each of the other men around the table. You said it would be financially beneficial to me to meet with you here today. Koob got immediately down to business. He didn't like to be away from his base for long. Yes, Burstow agreed, becoming equally somber. First of all, for your trouble in coming here, I want to give you this. He motioned to another man who picked up a briefcase off the floor beside his chair and placed it on the table. A half-dozen men passed the briefcase around the table to King Koob. That's $100,000 in cash, Burstow told him. The king opened the briefcase and peered inside. He could not stop his eyebrows from expressing his surprise and delight. However, he quickly mastered himself. He shut the briefcase and deliberately took his hands off it. He put them in his lap. I am grateful for this gesture and appreciate what it signifies for our future dealings. Koob nodded his head in Burstow's direction, following this statement. You are most welcome, King. Burstow nodded back. Now, what we have in mind is a simple task we think you and your organization are ideally suited for. I'm going to let Samsel brief you on the details. Burstow turned to a man sitting on the opposite side of the table from himself and Koob. This man, Samsel, was the youngest of the executives in the room, yet even he had graying temples and crow's feet. He removed a large photograph from a folder in front of him and passed it over to Koob, this time in the opposite direction the money had taken. This is a picture of Toadsgabot, he said. Have you ever heard of him? Koob took up the photo and examined it. No, he decided, sticking out his big frog-like lower lip. He is, to be blunt, an enemy of our company and all that it stands for. Now, killing him is, for certain reasons that I'm not going to go into, not an option. It is much more conducive to our needs that his plans for the advancement of his self-awareness and personal fulfillment be derailed. King Koob's look betrayed a landfill of disbelief. He said nothing, however. I know, Samsel interpreted Koob's look correctly. It sounds crazy, but our mutual antagonism goes much deeper than mere business rivalry or financial matters. Koob glanced at Burstow. I have heard about your religious activities, he croaked. Samsel and Burstow exchanged looks. The latter nodded. Turlobog Machine of Bertoda is the revenue-generating arm of a philosophical society, Samsel explained. I am not at liberty to go into details about our activities in that arena, nor those of our parent society, but I assure you that Toadsgabot is the main obstacle to our further development. Okay. Koob dropped the photo on top of the briefcase. If you don't want him killed, what do you want done with him? We know that Toadsgabot is, or soon will be, on his way to the Perfectual. King Koob's eyes flashed at the sound of this name. As part of a personal pilgrimage, Samsel continued, we want you to stop him from reaching the Perfectual and, if possible, divert him to your rival establishment. Koob blinked hard, wiping away his blinding hate. Divert him how? He asked. That's up to you, Samsel smiled. You know those mountains better than anyone. Surely you have extensive resources in the area. Koob considered. He glanced from Reagan to the uniformed men. Before I answer any specific logistical questions, he began, I want to know how much I'll be paid for this. Samsel started to speak, but Burstow interrupted him. $3 million, he told Koob. Before the king could say anything, Burstow continued, "But understand, that's the entire budget for the operation. Any expenses you incur are to be taken out of that." King Koob found that his hands were back on the briefcase. He drummed his fingers up and down as he formulated his words. I don't understand something. How can this man be diverted from his pilgrimage indefinitely? Let's say that I trick him somehow into coming to the Nimoy Memorial instead of the other place. Won't he know the difference and just go there later? Samson looked down at his hands. I can only say that there is a time factor involved here. There is a limit to how long Totskobo will spend on this endeavor of his. So you're thinking he'll just give up eventually? Koob jumped in. Well, yeah, Samson agreed, but Koob again interrupted. But what difference does it make whether he comes to my place or not? There are, as you put it, religious factors at work as well. For reasons that we do not wish to elaborate on, Samson emphasized these words. We believe that if Totskobo visits the Nimoy Memorial, it will alter his worldview in a way advantageous to us. It will be the icing on the cake to his failure to reach the perfectual. Koob made a hissing noise as he jerked his head downwards. The perfectual, he snapped, isn't 2 miles from my place. What is to keep him from going there after he's left? He won't, Samson was adamant. We know this man. We know how he thinks. If he's delayed on the trip to the perfectual for a certain amount of time, he won't continue the journey. And if he manages to make it all the way to Wankins and get sidetracked to the Nimoy Memorial, he won't continue on to the perfectual. You'll just have to trust us on this. Koob looked at Burstow. Delay him, he said. Yes. Divert him. Yes. Koob sighed. Well, I think I can do that. Burstow broke out into a wide grin. Excellent, he cried. Do we have a deal? He extended his hand again. Sure, Koob nodded. As he shook hands with Burstow, he realized that he hadn't asked why these men with their money and organization couldn't handle the problem themselves. Then realized with a quickly succeeding thought that he didn't care. $3 million would buy as much advertising as he needed to spread awareness of the Nimoy Memorial across the continent. Arrangements were made to transfer the money into Koob's account. This was done along with the delivery of the usual veiled threats as to repercussions should Koob fail to follow through. But by this time, Koob wasn't focusing. All he could see was the long-dreamed of expansion of his memorial into a fully developed theme park. I'll show south of the border, he thought grimly. Outside the building, his assistant, Klauto, was leaning against the car, reading a magazine. How'd it go, boss? The young man asked as he saw Koob approaching. It went... Koob tried to think of an appropriate image as he waited for Klauto to open the door for him. Like an episode of Batman, he finally concluded. Klauto made sure his employer was securely in place before he shut the door. Cool, he declared as he walked around the car.